So I've entitled this Chief Citizen. This will be part 4, basically. It's really a 3-part series, and this will be a smaller part 4 just to kind of sum it all up. We're going to try to unravel some of the narrative here. And we're just going to look deeper into some things and try to see how I derived to the answers in the previous videos. All right, so let's begin with the word Torah, which is used very liberal, and get an understanding of the word Torah, and that just doesn't mean just law. The Torah in Judaism consists of all the first 5 books of the Old Testament, or, the Christian Bible's Old Testament. They're all wrote by Moses. They're not just the law, they're not the 10 Commandments, or just the 613 Commandments. We're talking an entire section of books. So the beginning, Genesis, would be part of Torah. So we get it? All right, so just addressing the narrative that the day of Shavuot, which is the giving of the commandments or the law to Israel at Mount Sinai, is the exact same day as the day of Pentecost, which is the giving of the Holy Spirit to the followers of Jesus. Now, again, addressed in the last video, the narrative that when God gave the law at Mount Sinai, 3,000 people died due to the sin of the golden calf. And then on the day of Pentecost, in the book of Acts, they go out and they receive the Holy Spirit. They go out and start preaching, and 3,000 people are saved because of the Spirit. This is grace against, a mean, terrible God. And if God is the same today as he is yesterday, God has to be the same today as he is yesterday. So as I said in the last video, God gives instructions. God gives decrees, words, commandments, his own words. And these words that God tells you to do kill you. That's a terrible God. That's not the right justice God, God of, love and peace and kindness and salvation and redemption. This is basically what's happening here. Now, don't get mad. I'm going to go and explain why. Okay, because between Christianity and Judaism, there's such a big strife and a big split where they both want to go to the extreme to stay away from one another, so neither resembles the other one. And this is where theologies just go crazily to the extreme. So first off, it's not even in chronological order, that statement. Moses goes up on Mount Sinai, where he's waiting, up there for 40 days to get the law from God. The original commandments are wrote out with God's hand on sapphire stones, not stones from the mountain, but stones that actually come from the heavenlies, and are given to Moses. Moses then proceeds halfway down to 3/4 of the way down the mountain when he sees the Israelites with the golden calf. Moses then breaks the commandments. So the Israelites haven't even received the commandments yet. Now, here's where Judaism comes in. Thousands of years of commentaries, thousands of years of rabbis and sages. Some of this stuff was passed down from people that were living during the times that they're talking about. So you can accept them or not. Christianity doesn't have this. Christianity has its commentaries that don't start until the Catholic Church, and then those commentaries are just based off of what we read in the English context through the King James Bible. So anyways, I'll back up. Judaism teaches that, or the sages actually teach, that being that these were wrote by God's hand and these were put on heavenly divine stones, this command, is so heavenly and so perfect that Moses knows, because the Israelites agreed to be in contract with God. God asked the Israelites if they would follow his commands, and he would make them a nation of priests and all of that stuff. And the Jewish people agree. This is before they get the commandments. So Moses knows that if he delivers these commandments that are from God to the people that are sinning, who have already decided they were going to go into a contract without ever hearing this contract, but it being a divine contract, and this would bring judgment upon the Israelites. So Moses does this to save them. Then Moses, in the Bible, instructs the Levites to then kill all 3,000 people that led this rebellion. As I said in the previous video, 3 million people are still almost saved by grace. Only 3,000 are killed. And that's by Moses, not God. Nor have they gotten the Torah yet. Moses has to go back up, get the Torah, he has to rewrite them himself, carve them out on the stones, and bring them back down, and then deliver them, which they're still divine, but they're not as divine as the ones that would have came from God. So now also through tradition, we're taught that with the Exodus, with Passover, all the Hebrews and the mixed multitude all came into circumcision covenant of Abraham. They were all protected and healed, covered by the blood. After Passover night, being protected with the blood, we have the largest mass healing ever recorded. No one really talks about it, but all 3 million people were healed. There was not a feeble person or sick person. That includes the elderly. So unlike the movie that we see with Charlton Heston, there's no old people being carried out. There's no old man limping on crutches. You could have been 99 years old and you could have walked through the desert like a 20-year-old person. Everyone was healed. Also, with healing is forgiveness. So they were all forgiven. They all had amendment made with the sacrificed Passover lamb. Healing and forgiveness go hand in hand through the entire Bible. Sin and sickness, hand in hand. So as they go, they get baptized, as we know, on their way to Mount Sinai. When they get to Mount Sinai, as I said before, they go into contract agreement with God that they will be in agreement with him, and he's going to make them his people. When Moses, as I said, goes up the mountain, he receives the first set of laws, the godly set made by God, carved by heavenly stones. At that point in time, the people were completely sinless, and the sages teach us that if it wasn't for the golden calf, Adam's sin was completely undone at that point in time. So by the receiving of the law, we have redemption, although it ended up not happening. So let's understand there first. That's how, one reason I get to this argument. Second reason is the entire concept of Jesus, Yeshua. So the Torah in Judaism is always synonymous with the Holy Spirit. We know that before creation, before the universe was created, God sought counsel with the Holy Spirit. We find this in Genesis 1 when God says, he asked the other gods, the other council about creating man. We find this in John 1:1 where, beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and then the Word becomes flesh and tabernacles among us, all that in John 1. We're taught by the sages that 7 things existed before God creates the universe. As I said, the Holy Spirit being one. Also, another one of these things that existed is the Holy Sanctuary. And in the Holy Sanctuary, there's an altar. And on this altar is this precious stone. And on this precious stone is the name of the Messiah carved in it. This is everything that exists before our universe starts. So the Messiah's name is already going to be known. So we go with, as I always say, John 1:1, Yeshua, Jesus, is the Torah. He's the living Torah, and he proclaims this multiple times in the New Testament. So when Moses goes up on Mount Sinai, God instructs Moses to bring the elders of Israel with him to meet with God. And it goes on to say that they met with God and God didn't smite them. And we also know that no man can see God and live. And it says they saw God, talk to God, and wasn't smited. So therefore, they saw Yeshua, the Spirit of God, which is synonymous, part of God, and would be the Holy Spirit of God, which is on Mount Sinai, giving the law. Now, as the Messiah and as the King, the tradition of Israel is that the kings of Israel had to write 2 Torah scrolls, and they had to keep one of them on their self at all times. They carried this with them at all times because the Torah was with God in the beginning. Therefore, God being the king of the universe, then the king of Israel must have the Torah with him at all times. This is known as the chief citizen. Shavuot is the Feast of Weeks, which is the counting of 7 weeks, and in Christianity it becomes Pentecost, which is from Jesus' resurrection. He appears for 40 days and he instructs his disciples to go into Jerusalem and wait there in prayer for 10 more days before he's going to send his helper. After he ascends, he'll send his helper to them. My laws will be put in their hearts and their minds instead of on tablets of stone. This is why he's referred to the helper. He helps you keep the laws of God, keeps the commandments of God, keep yourself pleasing to God. Basically, it all boils down to pleasing to God. Using law and commandments, we're all going to get in arguments here. But anyways, this is the entire point of the Holy Spirit. So Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, which is 7 weeks. 7, also the Jubilee. 7 being a number that represents perfection, which we all know. Jubilee begins with the end of the 7 sabbatical years. We know there's 7 days, and the 7th day is a Sabbath day. Christianity is very familiar with Jesus being the Lord of the Sabbath. We have 7 feasts, and all the 7 feasts point to the Messiah's reign and the plan for all eternity. We even have in the book of Luke where Luke illustrates this idea where he has Jesus and his disciples eating the grain on a Sabbath. And this is to illustrate that it's Israel is to eat of the crops in the time of the Jubilee. Yeshua also heals a woman on a Sabbath, declares her sins are forgiven, and declares that she's set free. So by Yeshua healing the woman on a Sabbath, this should be understood by the disciples as Yeshua ushering in the Jubilee with his atonement, and then this would be the proclamation of the nation of Israel's forgiveness of their sins. Now, Pentecost is 50 days between resurrection of Yeshua and his ascension and the 10 days waiting, where Shavuot is 50 days between the Exodus and the time it took to get to Mount Sinai. 50 in Judaism is also a number of perfection, just like the number 7. So 50 in the Jewish Kabbalistic thought is connected with the ideas of enlightenment and reaching higher and further forms of enlightenment. And we're taught that a human can only reach 49 levels of purity. And anything beyond that would consist of the divine. Moses is said to have reached the 49th level of purity. But again, anything beyond that is of divine nature. Now, what the church doesn't teach you is that there are 48 prophets in the entire Old Testament. When you get to the New Testament, there's John the Baptist, makes 49, and everyone, Israel, Christianity, and Islam recognizes Jesus, Yeshua, as a prophet, making him the 50th, divine. Hence, 50 days of Shavuot to the giving of the law and the 50 days of resurrection to Pentecost. We see that Yeshua declares himself to be the light of the world. Now, in Hebrew, the word for light is or. And the expression in let there be light in Genesis 1:1 is, God says, let there be light, is Elohim, Yehe, or Vehe, or. Which, the gematria to that is 613, which is the law, the commandments given at Mount Sinai, Torah of God. Jesus declares, I am the light of the world. In Judaism, unlike which we think is just a Christian thought, Judaism definitely, rabbis believe, 100% unarguable, that the light of the world is the Torah of God. So we have Yeshua proclaiming he is the living Torah. And this is only one of several times. It's just you have to understand the Jewish thoughts behind the symbolisms to the light, to living water is also another one. So what's happening a lot, and what happens a lot in Christianity, and it's just part of the theology, is we take this based off of Paul's arguments. So with Paul being a rabbi, Paul's arguments are basically the exact same arguments that would have been found in Ezekiel. Rabbis teach the same things over and over and just do things and say stuff in a different manner. In Ezekiel 20:21, we have the law to the children of Israel, which is the person who obeys the law will live by the law. That's part of what we use to defend how the law is bad, the law will kill, and the law brings death. And then also in Ezekiel 20:25, we have where Ezekiel claims that God gave Israel statutes and decrees, laws or ordinances, which they could not live by. Now, is Ezekiel claiming that the law that God gave is bad and God purposely gave them this, that they couldn't do it and they would fail and they would have to be punished for it and it brings death? Well, Christianity does use this as proof to back up what they're using with Paul here, where Paul says that the law, brings death and all of this. But then Paul does go on to say that the law is good and the law is great. Paul goes tremendously through the book of Romans and goes just on and on and on about defending the law. We break Paul up. We break up the Bible into different sections and different paragraphs. If you take all of that out, Paul starts with the whole where he's in, doing the thing I find out I don't want to do. This is a long statement going on, and it very much tells us that the law is good. We know that Paul says the law is good. So what is Ezekiel saying? As I said, Christianity uses this, and this is also an argument or a debate, actually, I should say, among rabbis. It's no different, but different. So the rabbis actually deal with this. So with the arguments being made by rabbis and sages, we have with comments from Rashi that God is punishing Israel for their sins and he's strengthening them and strengthening their inclinations, much like he did with Pharaoh by strengthening Pharaoh's heart in order to push them and persuade them to where he needs it to go. A lot of Jewish commentaries and other Jewish rabbis and teachers from them have argued against Rashi and doesn't believe that, so it's not a settled thing there. And one of the most given and accepted explanations is by Rabbi Malbim, where God gave them this disadvantage of sacrifice by sacrificing the firstborn calves, unlike the pagan world who sacrifices their children. So he bases it off of the phrase in Exodus, which is Becha Avriyeh Kopeteh Rahim, the Torah commandments that sanctify the giving of the firstborn, sacrificing of the firstborn. So using the interpretations of Exodus 13:12, we see that the interpretations in the Bible are done It just depends on the way they do the interpretations. And if you're reading some of them, you won't get this idea. So the NIV, the NEB, and the AV pretty much have the same idea, which I don't think actually gives out human sacrifice. But the JPS, which is the Jewish version of the Bible, where the Bible's wrote in the Hebrew, leaves open this interpretation. So certainly we can say that no Jewish rabbi, no person that has any understanding of Judaism would even consider arguing that Ezekiel is against the law or decreeing that God gives bad laws. Ezekiel is a prophet, and the prophets are the defenders of the law. They're champions of the law. The prophet's main goal is always to warn the people and draw them back to the Torah, the commandments of God. So we know with Paul that Paul's hard to understand. We're told that directly in the Bible. And we have Yeshua making statements such as, those who hear my words, or my sheep know my voice, all basically my words, the Torah. Staying with and concluding with Ezekiel, in Ezekiel 11 and 36, the proof of the Messiah is that the Messiah will come and cleanse us. He will remove our hearts of stone and give us hearts of flesh. And he will cause us to walk in the commandments of God. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Word became flesh and tabernacled among us. So again, this argument not only is saying that God gave terrible laws and decrees that lead you to death, we're also saying Jesus did the same thing, because God gave you Jesus. Jesus is the law, and Jesus led them to death. Jewish people will never accept Christianity with these kind of statements, because the Torah is not just a religion, it's their lifestyle. It's everything they're about. The entire point of the Bible is to save Israel. You can believe it's the end times all you want. The Bible states that all of Israel must return to Israel. It's happening and been happening for years across the world. Something has to happen in America. We don't see the American Jews moving back to Israel, so something has to happen here, and it hasn't happened yet. All Jews have to return to Israel. And Jesus himself says he will not return until Israel proclaims him the Messiah. That's in the Bible. You can read it yourself. That's where Jesus laments over Israel. So the entire point here is to help Judaism, is to aim towards Judaism. This is my entire job, is reconciling Israel and Christianity, Judaism and Christianity together. This is one goal, and it's sorting through messes like this that keep us so theologically apart. Anyways, so that's my arguments on Yeshua being the Torah of God, and why we should be careful with some of the theological thoughts that we just say and repeat because they sound good. So anyhow, blessed Shavuot, blessed Pentecost, and Shalom.